Suppose we look at this formula, cost plus margin equals selling price. Let's say we pay $300 for something, we mark it up $100, and we sell it for $400. We call this our cost, we call this our margin, markup, gross profit. There's a lot of things you can call it. I'm going to call it margin. The book uses the word M and they use the word markup, but that's a little bit ambiguous, so I'm going to call it the margin. And basically, if someone does this in his or her business, oftentimes we're going to say, I have to know percentage-wise what to mark things up to stay in business. Now, there's two ways of doing this. Some businesses base their markup on cost. A markup based on cost looks like this. The word that comes after on is the base. It's the 100%. If something's on cost, that means it's based on cost. If we say somebody needs a 35% markup on cost, that means cost is the base. That means cost is the 100%. The first thing I ever do in any of these problems, I use the formula cost plus margin equals selling price, and I look in the problem and say, what's the base? What comes after the word on? It's either going to be cost or it's going to be selling price. If it's cost, I put the letter C right here by the margin so that I remind myself that it's a margin based on cost. Then I put 100% under the cost and I put the letter C here, and I put the letter C here, and I put the letter C here. I put it all over the place so that I know that it's based on cost. Now, where would I put this 35%? Is that the margin or is that the selling price? That's the margin, isn't it? That's a 35% margin. Pardon? Yes, it calls it markup, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like that word. Markup is fine when you're talking about based on cost, because we are marking it up. Let's say we buy something for $300. We are going to mark it up 30%, 35% based on cost. Notice what this letter C does. When you see something in parentheses next to something else, what does that mean mathematically? It means multiply. So if we take 35% times the cost, that'll give us the margin. The margin is 35% times the cost. So everybody punch in 300 times 35%. 105, okay, good. Now, if they asked us for the selling price, we would just add those two together, wouldn't we? In these grids, first number plus second number always equals third number. So we get 405 as our selling price. Now, they're not going to ask us this, but what if we wanted to know what percent goes here? First number plus second number equals third number. This is 135% of the cost, isn't it? Because it's bigger than the cost. Markups based on cost are exactly like percent increase. In other words, when 30 goes up to 405, it went up 105. How significant is that? Well, let's compare it with what it used to be. Take 105 and divide it by 300, you'll get 0.35. That's a 35% increase when 300 goes up to 405. So the math is just like percent increase when we base it on cost. And the picture looks like this. Here's our cost, which is 100%. We add 35% margin to that, and we end up with a number that's bigger than both of those, that's our selling price, and that's 135% of the cost. So markup based on cost is just like percent increase. It's just like saying we bought something and we paid 35% tax on it, and that's how much we wrote the check for. The math is all the same. We're just giving it different terms. Now, who would base their markup on cost? Anybody who knows what their cost is, but doesn't know what it's going to sell for. A manufacturer would base their margin on cost. They know exactly how much each of these little pieces cost that goes into that thing. They know exactly how much their labor costs to produce that thing. They know how much it costs to get it off the line, to put it on the pallets, to run the forklift around. So they know their cost. But once they ship it out to the retailer, they have no idea what that retailer is going to sell it for. So a manufacturer is going to base their markups on cost. Now, much of the world, much of the businesses in the world base their margin on cost. Most retail businesses, however, base their margin on selling price. Let's look at a very similar situation where we say, this business, we pay $300 for a widget. We pay $300 for a widget. To stay in business, we need a 35% margin on selling price. Find the selling price and the margin, or the markup. Now, the numbers are exactly the same as the previous problem. The only thing that's different are these words coming after the word on.